Welcome to Booked, the bookstore education podcast, brought to you by the American Booksellers Association. This episode is the third in a four-part series we've been presenting with CoverHound on business insurance basics for bookstores. In this episode, we'll be covering workers' compensation, navigating claims, compliance, and coverage. Caitlin, thank you so much for coming in today. It's all you.
Thanks so much. And thanks for having me. This is my favorite part of every quarter, actually, where I get to tell a story. So yes, at this point, it's a trilogy of Taylor. So I'm pretty excited to introduce any of you who have not been to one of these before to Taylor and the stuff that Taylor has been through. They've had a really hard year. Also, before we jump in, I just want to give a shout out to Sam. I see them in the audience. I just want to say thank you so much. Sam owns a bookstore, of course. He's the Norwich Bookstore. He's had some very recent work comp issues. And so we're going to kind of tell the story, pull in Sam and just let him talk a little about his experience. And then we want to kind of get into the fun stuff, the nerdy stuff about insurance. So I'm pretty excited for that. I just also want to let you guys know on the call with me, I've also got Felix. He's our VP of Sales and Distribution. So as you have questions, as we're talking coverage specifics, he'll jump in and answer some questions. I am a licensed agent. I have not sold a policy in 16 years, so I'm probably not the best person to tell you about what's going on today in terms of quoting, but we got some resources for that. But for now, let's get started. Navigating claims, compliance, and coverage. I love, how the copywriters title things. It's so fun. Book biz and workers' comp. So I'm going to start before introducing you to Taylor. Just a quick overview of like what work comp is. Work comp is typically what you're going to hear. You're not going to hear a lot of people say workers' compensation insurance, but it covers your employees. I will also note in here, it also covers yourself, which we can talk about. And there's a lot to digest there. And I think there's a lot of benefit and things to consider with that. It's going to provide employees with financial coverage. We say employees, you are considered an employee of your business in a lot of cases. And it offers protection from personal liability lawsuits and claims for workplace conditions. And that is protection for you from your employees in that sense if they were injured. Very high level what it is. We'll kind of get into more of like the specifics and things to consider and specific endorsements and coverages, but that's just kind of quick overview. Why is it necessary? Well, in some states, it's because the state mandates it. So like there's that. But in others, in general, work comp claims do happen, whether it's office administration with carpal tunnel, whether it's like being, injured in terms of falling or something like that, which some of you are going to be familiar with. Holistically, things happen in the workplace. And if that's the case, as the employer, you are liable for that injury, whatever it may be. Here's just a few examples of things that are going to come up for for you guys. A, the laws. B, average cost, about $41,000. I don't know about you and I don't want to get in your pockets, but for me, that's a lot of money. And general things we see, slips, overexertion, carpal tunnel, trips, falls, things like that are going to be the most common. So think of your clumsiest friend and then picture them as your employee. That's what we're talking about here. Hi, kids. And then on average, it's about 14 days to recover from an injury. And, I like to think like 2 weeks doesn't sound like a lot, but when you're thinking about the needs, missing time, again, it adds up quickly. And then that's an average. For some people, it might be a day. For others, it could be 6 months to a year. So just kind of the why before we go into whimsical pages. I love whimsical pages. It is near and dear to my heart. It is a bookstore, like many of you are booksellers as well. And Taylor is its owner. And Taylor's passionate. They're an entrepreneur. They love books, wanted to be a big part of the community, open a space for people to come. And at this point in the trilogy, because it's still a trilogy for now, they have opened and they've got a bustling retail shop, right? They've got dedicated employees. They are living the dream. Started off in the garage. Now they're in their building with, 5, 6 employees. Life is good. Business is thriving. But Taylor didn't open a bookstore because they know a ton about risk management and workplace safety. Okay. That's, this is not an OSHA operation in a lot of cases. So Taylor doesn't know what Taylor doesn't know. Despite the lack of awareness though, surrounding risk management and just, all of those things, OSHA, whatever, Taylor does have a well-rounded business insurance coverage plan and it's in place and includes work comp. So again, if you've known Taylor, Taylor's been through some stuff this year and Taylor has really realized that insurance can make or break an experience and a business, and Taylor has work comp. So good for Taylor. Bad for Taylor's employee one day, though, because one fateful day, as they always do, Taylor deals with a serious workplace injury. A staff member fell off a step ladder. Pardon my unable to talk right there for that moment. Crashing through a display of stationery and journals. Okay, it can happen. We've seen it. You may have even seen it. Sam may have even seen it. We'll see. And the staff member was injured, right? There's, fractured wrist, there's cuts, there's an ER visit. That's a really scary situation emotionally as well as physically. From a business owner or friend, it's just not good, right? There's panic, right? It's concerning what's going on. You're distraught. This is someone you work with every day. It's awful. Taylor's really upset. They're very concerned for their employee and friend. But work comp coverage does step in and they're ready to provide support. And what does that support look like? It can look like a variety of things. If we think about your retail space, so if you do have a brick and mortar, or even if you've got pop up, if you've got one of the cute trailers people tow around now, there are risks in all of those. There's slips, strains, falls, exposure to harmful substances, which absolutely can happen as well. Cleaning supplies, plumbing, all of that's in the realm. And you're going to have financial protection whenever a disaster strikes in these cases. So if you're looking at high level summary, this is kind of what you could expect to be covered under work comp for any of those situations in any setting. Before we go into like work comp and explaining the coverage and then letting you know how Taylor's story ended, I really wanted to take a step back and introduce Sam. So again, Sam's with us today. He owns a bookstore. I hear that he's had some issues, and I'm really excited to see what, his story has been, see if you guys have questions about it, or see if Felix and I can be a resource at all to help with it. And I'm going to stop sharing for now. Of course.
Yeah, hi. For those who don't know me, my name's Sam Koss. I'm one of the co-owners of the Norwich Bookstore in Norwich, Vermont. And before that, I have been a member of the ABA for a long time at various stores on the West Coast. And yeah, like Caitlin alluded to, we in the last 6 months did have a workplace injury and a resulting workers' comp claim here at the Norwich Bookstore. And watching Taylor's story, it really happened just like that. I had a longtime staff member on a stepladder. You know exactly the kind that I'm talking about. It's 18 inches off the ground, and you think, how could you hurt yourself on one of those? And you can. And of course, it's easy to do. Could have happened to me. Could have happened to anyone. You lose your balance, and when you fall from 18 inches off the ground at the right angle, that can really hurt. And so what we ended up with was a colleague of mine who suffered a serious injury, and they broke their knee. And this has actually been a fairly long recovery period for a number of reasons. So the average that Caitlin pointed out was a 14-day recovery period for workplace injuries. Ours has been a lot longer than that. But luckily we have always had great workers' comp coverage that it was important to us from day one, and it is required in the state of Vermont. Vermont is one of those states that does have pretty good legal protections to take care of workers, and it's one of the things I like about living here and doing business here. But obviously, you should check your own state's laws, but make sure that you have the right kind of coverage and the right amount of coverage. But it was very, very important to us from the very beginning that we had good coverage, just in case there comes a time. I mean, we all know, we don't work in a warehouse, we don't work in a factory. Anyone who knows me, who's out there today, knows that I am kind of a belt and suspenders safety guy. And I'm always the one with jumper cables and the first aid kit, and and I'm always the one kind of making sure that things are as safe as they can be. And yet I still had an accident that resulted in an injury in my workplace, and I think that just kind of illustrates how this can really happen to anyone. And our experience with our workers' comp team has been really helpful. I thought that I knew a lot, for somebody who is not in the insurance, where I felt that I had done my research, but of course when I actually had this experience, I realized there were gaps in my knowledge, and our insurance team filled those in really quickly, which was very helpful. Um, and that's they've been an ongoing resource as we've continued to work to get our colleague back up and running and back into our into the day-to-day of the staff, and also to just make sure that everything was safe at work, and to make sure that we were compliant with OSHA and things like that. That's part of the process when you have a claim, is that you want to have OSHA will want to hear about it, and in our case they talked with us and they talked to the insurance company, and it was very clear that it was that our experience was a simple accident, but the insurance company was very helpful in kind of explaining to me what that was going to be all about, and really helping us, helping the employee, and it was a good thing to have. So definitely no regrets with being fully and well insured for workers' comp.
I love that. And, as an insurance person, we tend to talk a lot about the business and protecting your business and safeguarding and all that stuff. But the reality is, like, this person worked with you for a long time. They were a friend, I would assume, right? Like on a certain level. Um, I'm sure, and I don't want to project, but like, were they nervous? How did they feel when it happened? Like, you're injured, you broke your knee, like you walk on your feet, it's got to be a little scary, right?
Oh yeah, tremendously so. I mean, and it was like I say, it was a serious injury in the store during a relatively busy afternoon. So it was obviously traumatic for the injured person. It was also traumatic for everyone else who was working that day. And for the people in the store. So it was an emotionally tough situation. I was, and for me, I was kind of the first one, or one of the first people on the scene, kind of took charge of the actual first aid situation, and ended up riding with my employee in the ambulance, and spending some time in the ER that evening with her while that was being taken care of. And so yeah, it was a tough week for everyone. um Definitely, and that's a big part of that experience as well, I think. And there was a recovery period, I think, for everyone, on not just for the employee who was injured, but for everyone on staff afterwards.
For sure. And like, my point in kind of asking that is, again, as we think about like taking ourselves out of the insurance piece and thinking about just the people we work with, knowing that that person's got replaced wages, and we don't need to speak about their specific benefits and what they're getting, but in general, holistically, right? Like, this person can take time to recover without having to worry about paying their bills, which has got to be even more important. In a lot of cases, this person can get the help they need without having to fight with an employer about not having coverage. Like, their bills are covered, the medical expenses are covered. And so when I think about already putting myself in that employee's shoes and trying to figure out on a livelihood and like personal standpoint how you navigate all this, it just relieves so much to know that, like, okay, well, this part's covered. I still have a lot to worry about. But I don't have to worry about that. And then even on your side, you don't have to worry about not having coverage and being sued and losing the bookstore over this, right? Like, holistically, I feel like things like this, sometimes we think about the insurance from a legal standpoint, like contracts and this, but a business is still able to be a business. The employee is able to get to recover and take time. A friendship still exists because all parties' needs are met. And I think sometimes for me, that's the most important thing, is just making sure that everyone's taken care of and that the business can still thrive and I can still pay my bills too, right? So I just wanted to kind of wrap that up, because I think sometimes that's missed when we talk about this. And even when we go through the PowerPoint, we're very much like, here's what it is and here's how it covers. But there's a very human element to all this that we don't talk about enough.
Yeah, absolutely. I really agree. And yeah, it was a huge stress relief. Again, both for my injured employee and for me, and like you say, I mean, in my case, this is somebody who I've worked with for a long time, who's worked for the store for a long time, somebody I care about very deeply, and so my stress, was very personal as far as, what is going to be, what how can I help? How can I, what is this person's needs going to be taken care of, et cetera, like you were saying. And, the working with my insurance folks right away, 8 a.m. the next morning, they were right on it. Was a huge stress relief, I think, for everyone. Certainly for me, knowing that, that I had a friend and a colleague who was suffering and wanted to make sure that that I was doing everything possible for them. It's hugely helpful for that.
I love hearing that. I feel like insurance gets a bad rap sometimes. So I'm really happy to know that it was a relief for you, because when I sell it, I view it like that, or when Felix sells it, we view it like that. So thank you. Any questions for Sam, or even questions about like what would have happened, how would it cover, that we can answer from a technical standpoint before we move on and talk? Because now we're going to transition into like, what are some of those benefits? What are some of the things that, Sam's employee may or may not have seen, may or may not have applied? That's kind of our next segue. So any questions before we dive into that? All right, you're all going to get an insurance quiz after this. So if Sam thought he knew some stuff, we're going to see. Thank you so much, Sam. Round of applause. All right, let me get back over here. Okay. So let's kind of jump into work comp now. So ultimately, we know what it's going to cover. It's going to cover pretty much anything that's going to cause you to be worked. I can go through all of these, but if you're at work and you were injured, like, that's what it is. It's work-related injuries, not necessarily you were getting dressed for work, not you stopped at the grocery store on your way home from work. It's work-related injuries that it's going to cover. And within that, it's going to cover everything that could happen most of the time. So first is medical benefits, and that's the actual medical benefits, the ambulance, the doctor's visits, the hospital stays, diagnostic tests, physical therapy, everything related to that injury. There's medical benefits coverage for. So that's kind of like first and foremost. Then there are limits, there are maxes. We're not going to kind of go into all that. If you have specific questions, you can certainly reach out to Felix and we can make sure you have a comprehensive plan. We can, reshop, remarket if we need to, all that good stuff, but you're going to have medical benefits. And then there's the well, what if I'm disabled? What if this injury has caused me to, I'm an artist, I'm a designer with my hands, and now I can't do that, right? And so there are disability benefits as well. So there's income replacement if you're unable to work due to that injury or illness. So think about just having that financial stability because you're injured and can't work. There's also rehabilitation. If you can't necessarily, if you were a graphic designer or you were a designer and you use your hand a lot, now you can't, how can we support you in making that transition? How can we support you to set you up for the future, right? So there's some of that vocational rehabilitation. There are death benefits. And I know this can sometimes be a very dark topic, but the reality is things can happen if if that could have resulted differently, if someone's driving to and from a convention and there's an accident, all of that is considered work related. There is support for that. And if you think about the loved ones left behind, I think that it's a really important thing to know and highlight. And I think it's also important that as we talk through all these apply to owners as well. So if you were to be injured, if you were, to pass because you own a business and you're working at it and something happens, your loved ones can be taken care of. So those are some high levels, but let's kind of get back to Taylor for a second. And so at the end of all of this, Taylor navigated another disastrous event. I cannot stress that enough. They have been through some stuff this year. But in a way, it was beneficial to the injured employee and the business. Kind of going back to Sam's example too, the business keeps going, the employee is taken care of. absolutely did not want it to happen, but at the end of the day, it resulted in a way that, both people have the support they need to navigate the situation as well as possible. And I think that's important. So kind of ending Taylor's story here. And now we're going to go into more of some contractual pieces for those of us who like reading contracts instead of fiction. I'm more of a fiction girl myself, just put that out there. I still have all of my books behind me that I still have to read. That's my to-read list from the conference back in February. It's about half the size it was. So employer's responsibility. What you need to know about work comp, key considerations regarding workplace safety. At the end of the day, there's a legal aspect of it in a lot of states. And I don't know how many off the top of my head, but there's, it's more than a handful. And beyond that, though, it really is like risk management at its finest. Is like, what could happen and how do we manage this in a way that, supports the business in a fiscal way and keeps everyone on their feet. So, when they accept work compensation benefits, they do forfeit the right to sue their employer. So, if you've accepted that, can't come back and sue, you're getting the support you need. So that's, kind of cut and dry contractual. A lot of times it's a responsibility as a good employer and business owner to provide work compensation coverage. Again, some of it's legal, some of it's just like good business owning, maintain a safe and work environment. All of you guys know this. I think all of you guys are caring about your employees. You care about your environment. But it's easy for A, accidents just to happen, or B, sometimes to even get complacent on things. It can happen. And so providing regular safety training, making sure that, essential duties and essential pieces are in place. And just kind of reminding people, like all of us are going to fall into habits and have a hard time coming out of it sometimes. So I think that's really important. And then prompt reporting of injuries when we think about responsibilities as well. So Sam mentioned by 8 a.m. next day, he's talking to his insurance, right? They're already on it. The faster you get involved, you get your insurance company involved as a, as the benefit. Sorry, I lost my train of thought for a moment. The better off it's going to be. We can start getting payments earlier. We can start taking care of things earlier. We can start making sure OSHA's involved. Whatever needs to happen, the sooner the better. Again, we talked about proactive safety measures. I always say do risk assessments. Like what are the hazards that you're starting to forget about? What are the hazards that if you're walking through and you see a stool wasn't put up, right? Like that's a trip hazard. So sometimes it really is just about navigating and seeing like where the complacency is, and then address those dangers as it comes up. If you think about walking in the grocery store and seeing the wet floor sign, that's not only a work comp piece, it's also just a liability piece. So it's always good to do proactive safety measures. And what I will say, there's a lot of carriers out there that offer support around this, not even in just work comp, but in other lines of business or types of insurance. They might be able to provide videos. They might be able to provide kind of like general safety things, claims experience they've seen that might help you identify risk and provide safety measures in a way that you weren't thinking about before. And so just lots of resources out there. Empower your team, train them. Do ongoing safety training. I know a lot of big companies, small companies, they'll do like every year you have certain states are going to require like say sexual harassment training. A lot of them are going to have different options available for you to continue to do safety training for your industries. You can look into that. Teaching proper lifting techniques. So, I know you guys probably aren't power lifters or necessarily ergo, but I think there's a lot of ways to support, again, your teammates and your employees and making sure that they are able to do things in a way that's safe. So close your stock rooms, organize your shelves, all that good stuff. Ergonomics, we do talk about if you've got people at cash registers, if you've got people sitting at the desk doing administrative work, if you're the one doing that, you're covering on your work comp, it's really good to take a step back. You can Google some ergo techniques. You can get provided resources, but like, is your chair accurate? Is your wrist placement accurate? Do you need a special mouse? These are just very small things that can help keep your employees safe and healthy so that they're healthy for themselves, so that you don't have to worry about a work comp claim. But I think that's a really easily overlooked thing as well. And again, I encourage us all to do it because a lot of us are probably sitting a lot more than we used to. And then cultivate a safety culture. So in general, if you're thinking about safety, if you're, Sam's like diligent, he's got his jumper cables, like it sounds like he kind of creates that culture. Things can still happen, as we've heard. But at the end of the day, having open communication about safety concerns, kind of doing your rounds, establishing protocols, at the end, we have to lead by example. So if we're being safe or teaching safe, it's going to bleed down into, our teammates, employees as well. So all about culture. And at the end of the day, it's crucial. Workers' comp is crucial. It provides financial protection for employees and ultimately for employers. That's essentially what this is saying. Coverage recap. We will share this: medicals, disability, vocational, death. These are big ones. There's a lot more that can go into this. Again, it can get as granular or as wide as we need to. And it can vary by industry, like what would be suggested as well. And then at the end of the day, if you need us, work with an agent. Evaluate the specific risk. What are you doing? Have you not checked your insurance in a long time? It might be time to kind of come back and say, when I started, I had, 0 employees and I was in my garage. And now I've got, a trailer that I haul around and 2 people and a driver and this and that, or whatever the case is. If you haven't thought about how your business has changed recently, you're going to want to reevaluate those risks. Work with us to do that. We can help you tailor coverage, review to make sure it's in alignment, all those good things. And now I will open up a Q&A session and see what questions we can answer for you, since we are on time. Does anyone have questions about their own policies, about things we talked about, hypotheticals?
I was wondering if, Sam, if I could put you on the spot again, what's one thing you wish you knew about the insurance side of things before you had to do your deep dive into it?
Well, it's a good question. Harkening back to like how, having a plan. I think that one thing I didn't know that, it wasn't a big deal, but it occurred to me, moments after our workplace accident. I was like, I don't know who to call. I think as I was on my way to the ER, a first step is always a good idea to contact, your attorneys right away to make sure that you're doing everything that you need to do to be compliant. And we did that, but I didn't know who to call at the insurance company. That was very easy to rectify. I shot an email to our insurance broker and said, "Hey, who do I call?" And they had a number back to me in about 5 minutes, because my insurance broker is great. But that's the kind of thing, like, again, you buy workers' comp, you sign up for the policy, you hope you're never, ever going to have to use it. But it's kind of like a fire extinguisher. When we were kids, my parents had a few expired fire extinguishers, and they brought them out in the side yard for us, and said, "Okay, pull the pin out and go wild." And just so we would know, if we were ever in the situation where we needed to use the fire extinguisher, we wouldn't be like, "Wait a minute, what do I use? Which one's the hose?" And I think it's the same kind of thing. I should have had that number up somewhere. Here's the person you call if you ever have a claim. In my situation, it was really easily rectified. But it's a good thing to know before you have to use it. Hopefully you'll never have to use it, but you want to know when you do.
That's good. We've created a claims checklist. It's not specific to us. It's more of like, when something happens, here are some quick things. We can certainly send that to you guys, but yep, that's part of it too, is just kind of having all that ready.
Can I just add something? Just speaking from it's interesting listening to all this, but I love it because that's exactly like we have a procedure, and we have packets actually, because we're large enough that we have like a employee injury packet. And here's the step 1. Is it grave or serious? Is it not? Then you skip this step. So it's nice to have those in place, and so therefore if you're not there, like I say, Sam wasn't there, someone else can still help them if they're injured. So a weekend or night or whatever it is. So that's good best practice.
I can speak for both Kim and I think a lot of booksellers in the room in saying that we love a good checklist. Yeah, they've saved me in a number of different ways, time and time again, and that it's a great idea to have a safety checklist, an insurance checklist, especially if you're a larger store.
This is actually an employee injury check. This is a step-by-step procedure on what to do for employee injury. It's not even a safe. It's not. And we actually investigate every single. We're in California, but we actually investigate every injury too, no matter if it's a workers' comp claim or not. So if someone cuts their finger, we interview them. How did you cut your finger? Why did you cut your finger? Was this your fault? So therefore we have documentation that we actually investigated every single injury, regardless of actually a workers' comp or not. So,
which I think is
That's
really
great.
good. And it just helps. It helps it go smoother. Go ahead, Kim. Sorry.
Yeah, no, just out of curiosity. So my understanding is that pretty much any injury that happens at the workplace, even like I just so many times we're like, okay, like, a workplace injury is, it's ergonomic or you fall off a ladder while dealing with overstock or whatever. But like, if you trip on something or I was talking to a friend who ran into a glass door because she was rushing around her office and wasn't paying attention and didn't know what to do because like that's embarrassing. Like it's not even related to work events. If it is at the workplace, then it is a workers' comp claim. And most of the time, a personal insurance will not cover that if it happened at the workplace. So I think that's something that
very important.
I guess I'm referring to an injury that doesn't require first aid or medical attention.
Yes.
So
yeah.
A stack of books fell on my foot, but I don't need to go see a doctor. It's fine. We still have every single injury
awesome.
reported, and we do an investigation on each one. Because it 2 days later, my foot's still hurt. I don't want to see a doctor.
Mm-hmm.
So then we open we send them to a doctor, and then we open the claim at that point.
Yeah.
And it can happen like that. There are some times it's like the adrenaline's high, you're embarrassed, and things don't set in until later. So yeah, I think it's really good. And you're right. Anything, typically, if you're going to the hospital, they'll ask you, is this related to work? That's like a question now. And if you say yes, so like ding, 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 like it gives the personal insurance company like, nope, we're not paying that. Talk to your employer. And if your employer doesn't have work comp, again, like think about that situation.
Yep.
Yeah.
And I really want to stress the work comp with employee, like you as a business owner, because in some cases you might be the only employee, you might not have it. And you're like, do I need it? But again, if let's say you just picked up a stack of books and you're driving them to your storage unit, like that's work, right? For you. Let's say, and then there's an accident and, you never want to take it to that far, but as someone who's a planner and an organized person myself, and who has like a young child and dogs and everything, like I am very anal about these things. And so I'm like, I kind of want to make sure no matter what happens, my family's taken care of. Like that gives me more anxiety than anything. And I think sometimes we sacrifice a lot as business owners and entrepreneurs and people just trying to make it. And the reality is it's probably not that much for the what if situation, considering like how it helps on the back end. And imagine if you can't be an entrepreneur because of an injury, right? Like you are worthy of that protection as well. So just please remember that too, because a lot of times you exclude yourself. And that's okay if you can, but like you don't have to. It's probably not even worth it. And now my cat just joined us on that note. All good points and questions. But yeah, I think we've got 3 checklists total. We have a claims checklist that we've provided. That's with the ABA. We've got specific to the ABA. We have got our kind of insurance checkup checklist. So again, if you started somewhere and things have grown and you're not keeping up with it, you've got double the inventory without noticing. That means you've got, double things you need to protect if something happens. So we've got like a few checklists to try to make it easier for you guys. So Kim's hooked me up with a lot of information to try to make sure we're tailoring everything to our booksellers.
And I did toss links to the CoverHound series handouts, which includes one of those checklists, a quick guide to workers' comp that CoverHound put together, as well as the slide deck. And I will put in the insurance checklist here too. That is a good reminder.
Are there any other insurance questions out here that we can answer since you have us? Even if it's not work comp? I'm not giving any banned book secrets though. That one I'm too excited about. You have to stay tuned for part 4. We're trying to decide if Taylor should just retire after this or like what, you know what I mean? Like, do they sell off into the sunset? Like, we don't know. Okay. Well, this has been a pleasure. Thank you all so much for joining.
Thank you so much,
Yeah,
everybody.
thank you, everybody.
Can I ask one last question? Actually, I asked because I looked at that checklist you sent, and the cyber liability insurance is on there. I have found that cyber liability applications are very arduous to try to get quotes, and typically it's hard to ensure that they will actually insure you, depending on your size.
Mhm.
Have have a lot of bookstores, ABA stores that are going through CoverHound been able to obtain cyber liability policies?
Yeah, absolutely. Yes. The answer to that question is yes, they are. There are some carriers that have very strenuous applications. The one thing that we do is if you don't qualify and we see it before we submit your quote, is we'll tell you, hey, you're probably not going to qualify because you don't have antivirus set up. You don't have two-factor authentication. So we'll give you the heads up so that you can make those adjustments, therefore qualify for that product. So we'll point out what's going to decline it before we even run the quote and the application.
But like even like indie commerce doesn't have a two-factor authentication, so I mean like
There's ways you can set it up. Some of our carriers give you the resources and they can even walk you through and give you some, places that you can go to get these things set up. So if it's e-commerce or if you're a regular brick and mortar, like we have solutions where you actually specialize in cyber liability. That's kind of like our bread and butter, if you would call it that. So all of our agents are very trained on that product specifically.
hmm.
We have a sister brand called Cyber Policy. And so pre-acquisition, Cyber Policy was a big focus for us. And so all of our employees are just cyber experts and from an insurance standpoint. So we use the brand CoverHound more, but in terms of expertise and offerings, the Cyber Policy brand is still there.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah, so we'll be happy to help you with that. If you need it, Mason, we can talk to you or we can follow up with you and see how we can get you some quotes. And then just
Yeah, I
walk
think
you
I'd
through
be
it.
interested in conversation. Our broker is great, but
Mhm.
I've never been able to meet that hurdle with the cyber liability insurance
Yeah.
to try to get the application and check all their boxes because it's just so arduous. So
Yeah, it's one of the newer products, so that's normal. A lot of like brokers that have been around, unless you specifically focused on that product, when it came out, they're kind of a little bit behind on what it does and how to apply for it. So that's understandable. We get that a lot.
Questions? Make sure you have your cyber insurance as well, because you can get hacked. Ask Phil, the ABA. Awesome. Okay. Well, thanks everyone. We'll see you in a few months.
Awesome. Thank you all. Really appreciate you.
Bye. Bye, everybody.
Bye.
Thank you for listening to Booked, the Bookstore Education Podcast brought to you by the American Booksellers Association. Don't forget to subscribe to the show on your favorite podcast app. Additional educational resources can always be found on the ABA website at www.bookweb.org. Happy reading! You're listening to Booked, the bookstore education podcast brought to you by the American Booksellers Association. In this episode, we're featuring part 3 of a 4-part series we're producing with CoverHound about workers' comp insurance, navigating claims, compliance, and coverage. Welcome to Booked, the bookstore education podcast brought to you by the American Booksellers Association. In this episode, we're covering part 3 of a 4-part series we've been presenting with CoverHound about workers' comp insurance, navigating claims, compliance, and coverage. You're listening to Booked, the bookstore education podcast brought to you by the American Booksellers Association. In this episode, we'll be featuring part 3 of a 4-part series on business insurance. Welcome to Booked, the bookstore education podcast brought to you by the American Booksellers Association. In this episode, we'll be presenting the third in a 4-part series with our business insurance partners, CoverHound. Welcome to Booked, the bookstore education podcast brought to you by the American Booksellers Association. This episode is part 3 of a 4-part series with CoverHound on business insurance basics for booksellers. This one is on workplace. Welcome to Booked, the bookstore education podcast brought to you by the American Booksellers Association. This episode is the third in a 4-part series on business insurance presented by our friends at CoverHound. In this episode, we'll be discussing workers' comp insurance. Welcome to Booked, the bookstore education podcast brought to you by the American Booksellers Association. This episode is part 3 of a 4-part series we've been... Welcome to Booked, the bookstore education podcast brought to you by the American Booksellers Association. This episode is the... Welcome to Booked, the bookstore education podcast brought to you by the American Booksellers Association. This episode is part 3 of a 4-part series we've been presenting with CoverHound Business Insurance about workers' comp